Well, welcome everyone to the Spoken Gospel Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We are continuing our look at the book of Chronicles today. We did kind of an overview on the last episode, and now we're going to jump into, I think, David's rise up to Solomon's reign.
That's right.
Okay, Seth,
right.
how you feeling about this part of the book Chronicles?
Great. Great. It's the best part of the story.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is definitely categorically
It's the best part of the story.
from a feels standpoint.
From the feels, yeah.
It's
It's
happy.
like all
it's the happy
up
part.
and to the right.
Yeah.
All the way till Solomon.
This is the part of Chronicles that you want your stock portfolio to look like.
Yeah,
up
that's
and to
right.
the right.
That's right.
That's right.
I have so many
I know
stocks.
so much about that.
I have so many stocks.
I don't know anything about that. But okay, last week or last episode we talked about how the book of Chronicles is about the need for God's king from the line of David to center Israel around God's priests.
That's right.
In order that there might be peace on every side.
That's right.
And the thing that was helpful about the priests was that it wasn't just priests operating in a temple. We were looking past that to their two core functions,
Yes.
which was communicating the words of God through prophetic singing, which pops up a bunch in the
Yep.
book, and offering forgiveness of sins through sacrifice.
That's right.
And we looked at all of this because this is speaking directly to the recipients of Chronicles.
They were rebuilding Israel
Yes.
after the exile.
Right.
And they're looking to their past for lessons about how to build their country in the future.
Because they might have been doubting the legitimacy of the line of David and the need for the temple. And
Yep.
so this book is reinforcing those things.
That's right.
Okay, and we saw how Jesus was the new king from the line of David who makes us a kingdom of priests, bringing peace on every side throughout all
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah.
Okay, is that a good summation of
I think
where we've been?
I think you nailed it.
Besides
I
the
think you nailed
awesome
it.
chiasm genealogy thing you did.
Oh,
If you
yeah.
missed that, you got to go
you
back.
You
'cause
should just go
that
back
was
anyway.
cool.
But
Okay, but today we're moving out of chapter 9.
into chapter 10 and the whole story of David rising to power.
Okay, what do we need to know to step into the story? I mean, we talked a little bit about the next part of the story, right? With Saul committing suicide, isn't
That's
that
right.
Okay,
yeah. So Saul, after the genealogies, and you're breathing heavy from just reading a lot of names after one after the other, you're thrown into the middle of a battle in which Saul is losing to the Philistines.
Mm-hmm.
An arrow pierces him, kind of basically fatally,
Yeah.
and then he bleeds out. But before it starts bleeding out, before he bleeds out, he commits suicide. And then we're told in verse 13 of chapter 10, Saul died for his breach of faith, or his lack of faithfulness. He broke faith with the Lord in that he did not keep the commands of the Lord, and also consulted a medium in seeking guidance. He did not seek guidance from the Lord.
Yep.
Therefore, he put him to death.
Yeah.
And so this shows us the anti-example of what Israel's not to do as it rebuilds its kingdom. If they don't listen to God, their kingdom will self-destruct.
Right.
Just like Saul did.
Yeah. Saul did not listen to the voice of God, and so
Right.
it led to ruin.
That's right.
Okay.
So, and now David's going to rise to power, and we're going to see throughout David's life how he responds to the voice of God and how this builds a successful kingdom for Solomon to inherit.
Let me ask one question before we jump into that, because I think like listening to the voice of God or
Yep.
seeking God for guidance, we'll probably have like a bunch of different versions of what that looks like in our heads.
Okay.
Is there any controlling image or idea we should have in our minds when we think about what does it mean to listen to the voice of God in Chronicles? What does it mean to seek his guidance? Obviously, it can mean a whole bunch of things, but what does Chronicles specifically direct our attention toward understanding that idea?
Okay, I think there's the most general way to think about it. It is obeying God's commands as recorded in the Torah. So
Okay.
to fail to listen to God is to fail to obey the commands as described in the first 5 books of the Bible and on.
That makes sense.
So that's one way to fail to listen to God, because he spoke. He wrote those words down with his finger on the 10 Commandments. The other way to fail to listen to God is to not ask what to do when it relates to actions in the kingdom. And so when you're talking about kings and kingship, you're primarily talking about how to engage in conflicts with other nations. And so most often that's warfare. And so to fail to ask God how to conduct war brings about a military loss. That's one way to say it. And so that example, I bring up that example because that's one of the most common in ways that kings fail to consult God.
Okay.
Kings are concerned with statecraft.
Yeah.
And so they frequently fail to consult God in their statecraft. They fail to consult God in military victories. And when they fail to consult God in military victories, what happens? They lose those military campaigns.
And we see that on the backside of Chronicles too?
We see it, yeah, chapter 14 we see it. The Philistines make a raid in chapter 14, and then David inquires of God, same word, shall I go up against the Philistines, and will you give them into my hand?
Right.
And God says, yes, I will. Here's how you do it.
Yep.
And over again, that pattern kind of plays out.
Okay. And then do we see anything on the other side of the chiasm in Chronicles of kings going out for war, not asking?
That's exactly, yes.
And they fail.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're going to see an example of that in David's life in just a second as well.
Okay. One question then about that is obviously guidance, seeking God's will for how to lead the kingdom can't just be about statecraft and war, because the idealized picture at the top of the mountain is Solomon and peace.
Yeah.
Where you're hopefully not fighting wars during peacetime.
That's right.
So is there an ideal that listening to God's voice is leading towards? And then once you've reached that ideal, does the guidance stop being necessary? How does Solomon fit the paradigm is my question.
How does he listen to God's voice?
Because he doesn't go out for war, you said last
That's
episode.
right, yeah. He listens to God's voice differently.
Okay.
And it's in the very first chapter that we're introduced to him in 2 Chronicles chapter 1. He asks God for wisdom.
Right.
That is God's guidance, right? He's asked, the first thing he does in his reign, he asks God, he inquires of God how to lead a nation. That's what he asked for. He's like, I'm too young, I'm too inexperienced to know how to lead a country that my father prepared for me. So give me guidance to lead these people well. He's inquiring of God, and then God gives him the information and the wisdom and the discernment needed to be a good judge, to be a good philosopher, to be a good teacher for a nation in peacetime.
And then he doesn't go out to war.
And he doesn't go out to war. So
yeah, it's interesting because it's like God clearly doesn't say to him, keep conquering.
Right.
Keep up the military imperialism.
Yeah. So guidance doesn't have to be directly tied to military, but I think maybe the stronger thing to say is in the place where kings fail to ask God for guidance is the place in which they will experience defeat. And so that's
regardless of what battlefield,
battlefield that is. But primarily, and Solomon's kind of in a privileged position. His father's the one who conquered them, and these were sanctioned by God. These victories were sanctioned. God gave him his spirit to do so, and he lives in a time of peace.
Yep.
Well, that peace is not necessarily guaranteed through all Solomon's reign, but the fact that there is peace is significant because it points towards the type of kingdom God expects for his kings.
Okay.
Kingdom, the world bows not in warfare, but in deference to the wisdom.
So the reason that Saul failed in the opening story of the book is because he failed to seek God's guidance.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
And now the opposite we're going to see is David and how he carries out his rise to power.
That's right.
Okay. Well, I'm on.
First king of Israel fails to listen to God's guidance. He's dealt with in 13 verses. He's out of the picture.
Got it.
And David comes on the scene. And the first thing that happens with David is that he's anointed, and then he takes the capital city of Jerusalem. So up until this time, Israel had been a divided nation. It had been a scattered group of tribes in a general area. They had never had real centralized leadership before. They had started to ask for a king. They started to ask for centralized leadership in Saul, but Saul was unable to provide it. He was unable to unite all Israel.
And this because you had the land allotments in Joshua, and every tribe had their own area, and they were kind of governed by judges for a period.
Yep.
And those were localized judges, not national judges. And they were we want to be like the other nations, give us a king.
Centralize all that. Yes.
Okay, great.
And so Saul failed to centralize. He failed to unite all Israel. But David, as soon as he's anointed, all of Israel comes to him and basically throws their flags under his leadership and says, we will follow you in whatever exploits you do. And the first thing he does is he establishes a capital for a new nation. This is like an innovation for Israel. They've never had a capital city before, not like this. They now have a military center, a governmental center, and a nation for the first time. In a sense, they've never had this before.
It's Hamilton all over again.
It's Hamilton all over again.
If you don't know what we're talking about, go back to the last episode.
And then the first thing we're told that after David establishes a capital is he builds an army full of mighty men.
And I don't need to have any bad radar on for this happening.
No.
Okay.
No.
Because I know other times, there are times that the Bible sets you up for the amassing of an army, the gathering of chariots,
That's
as
right.
a bad thing.
Yes.
As like, oh, they're becoming Egypt, or they're becoming Babylon.
In First Chronicles, the mighty men that keep coming around David, the army that keeps coming around him, are actually from all the tribes of Israel. So all the scattered tribes are sending their best warriors to David. And it's a symbol that he is able to unite Israel for the first time in a way that Saul never could. Saul failed to be the type of king who could unite Israel under one national identity following God's guidance.
Right.
And so as David follows God's guidance, all of Israel begins to follow him. And so this is just like a key principle of leadership. If you're a new leader in a new Israel rebuilding itself, it's like, how are you going to unite all these scattered people who have a whole bunch of different opinions about how our kingdom should be run? Well, new leader in this reconstructing Israel, follow God's guidance. And what happened to David? The tribes came into alignment with David as he followed God's guidance.
I see. So the point isn't look at the tribes, they're unifying. Unity of Israel is the point. It's a fruit of listening to God's voice and guidance.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
It's a stamp of approval that this guy's listening to God's voice. Look, the impossible has been made possible.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
That's right.
So he establishes a capital, garners and unifies all of Israel around himself, and establishes a military of mighty men.
Yep.
And then what?
And then he, with his new capital in Jerusalem, surrounded by an army, wants to do the right thing by bringing the Ark of the Covenant into the city of David.
Because it's been out
in Kiriath Jearim. It's been out in the wilderness for a while now.
Was it in the tabernacle at this point?
No, it's in Kiriath Jearim, which is separate from Gibeon, which is where the tabernacle was. So, which is interesting. The Ark and the tabernacle were not always in the same place, right? And
they were supposed to be, or no?
I'm not quite sure.
Okay, there was a place for it in the tabernacle.
There was a place for the tabernacle,
but God even commanded sometimes that it be taken out and go ahead of an army here or there.
If you remember from 1 Samuel, the ark was actually stolen by the Philistines.
Oh, is this the rats and tumors?
The rats and tumors thing. It gets stolen and it ends up getting placed there until it can be, I think, reunited with the tabernacle.
Okay.
So we're kind of in that space.
Gotcha. What does it mean for the tabernacle what does it mean for the Ark of the Covenant to not be where David's about to take it, for it not to be in the capital city?
Right.
Like, why is that significant, and why go on this tumultuous sojourn to bring it back?
Because the Ark is a symbol not only of God's presence, but it's also the place where worship is supposed to happen. This is the place where priests are supposed to gather, and the priests are supposed to be singing to God and offering prophecies through their songs to the king and to the ruler. The Ark represents the center of God's guidance.
Yeah, it's the footstool of his throne.
That's right. That's where
he rules from.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
So and David understands that he's the king of the people of God, and God is the true king of this nation.
So it's got to be where he is.
So the throne has to come to the capital. If God's the true king of Israel, then the throne's got to come to the capital city.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
His throne has to come to the capital city.
You have to move the president to the seat of power.
That's right.
Like, the president lives in the White House.
Yes.
And since David's not going to go out and live in a field with the Ark, he's going to bring the Ark to him.
That's right.
It's a mobile White House.
That's right. And that's why he's bringing it to him, and that's also where he's going to receive direction from God.
Okay.
Listen to my guidance. I'm the king of this nation. You're my prince, David.
Yeah.
It's another way to say it. Now execute my commands faithfully.
Yeah. I have so many questions.
Okay,
right
go for it.
I don't know if they're helpful.
Well, then let me continue the story.
Okay.
So David wants to do this. He wants to bring the Ark.
Yep.
But there's a problem.
Okay. Ooh, rising tension.
Rising tension. He treats the Ark like he treats his military campaigns.
Oh, what do you mean by that?
He has been on like a victory march for a long time now.
Yeah.
He's been gathering men of military prowess to himself.
Amassing an
He's
army.
been gaining capital cities. He's been enacting victories.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, let's get the seat of the king's throne into the temple.
Right.
He sends his soldiers to pick up the Ark.
Okay.
And if he would have read his Torah a little bit closer, he would have known that only Levites are actually allowed to function around and use and carry and touch
Right.
the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, there's some prohibitory tales.
Right. And so as they're bringing this Ark to Jerusalem, one of his men touches the Ark and he immediately dies.
Right.
Because he's inappropriately approaching God's throne. David has made his first failure in his reign is he's inappropriately reacting and treating God, the center of God's power.
He didn't listen to God's guidance.
That's right.
In the Torah.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So that's what he doesn't do it right.
So he doesn't listen to God's voice, and there's death and failure.
That's right.
I got it.
But he puts the Ark aside for a moment.
Yep.
And he does what he was supposed to do the first time.
Talk to God.
He talks to God.
Okay.
He listens to the Torah, and he builds a bureaucracy of Levites in order for them to properly take care of the Ark.
How does he do that?
So he goes and he consults the records of Levites.
Oh.
He calls all the Levites who are supposed to be in charge of the temple. He commissions them to take care of the Ark.
Yep.
And he calls them to bring the Ark from its resting place into Jerusalem the right way.
Okay.
So he learns from his mistake.
Yep.
God corrects him. He asks for forgiveness. He
Yes.
listens to the law of the Lord. He sends the Levites out to bring the Ark of the Covenant into Israel. And by the end of chapter 16, the Ark is in the temple, surrounded by priestly singers. And David, he commissions, he anoints, he makes official the chief songwriter, the chief prophet, the chief musician, Asaph.
Yeah. Oh, from the Psalms.
From the Psalms, to preside over the prophetic singers and to guide all the musicians in Israel to sing.
So that way his failure to listen to God's voice may never happen again.
That's exactly right.
He'll be surrounded by the prophetic songs of God's guidance.
That's right.
Okay, that makes sense.
And we have even 2 Psalms that were written for that occasion.
Oh, cool.
Psalm 95 and 96 and 105.
96 and 105.
Were written for this occasion when the Ark first comes into Jerusalem.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay. One observation.
Okay.
Tell me if it's important. It's strange. Now, it's not strange in the flow of events. If I just have my think about it chronologically, don't worry about it hat on, then it's not going to be a problem, or I wouldn't notice it. But having my this history is communicating something.
Yes.
It's communicating theology. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. It's interesting that the ideal Davidic king, David himself, that people are supposed to emulate and follow, and if he gets on the throne, everything is good.
Yep.
And yet, his rise to power doesn't end when he solidifies the kingdoms under himself and establishes a capital and builds an army and has successful military campaigns. Something's still missing.
Yep.
God's throne is missing.
He hasn't centralized God's throne, his priesthood yet.
Right.
That's right.
And it's like there's this this longing, it just seems, that the Davidic king has for the real king to sit on the throne in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I'm wondering there if there's like that messianic bridge.
Even in the hope of having the Ark in Jerusalem.
It's
that
like
is in and of itself
drawing out
hope
that
for
story,
Jesus.
and it's like, look, we are like David, searching for a king, needing to put him on the throne, but that's not the end of the story. We're gonna need God himself to come and take the throne, and you have this like God man king hybrid thing. I'm just like, oh, that's interesting. How
that is
kind
interesting.
Of
I haven't thought about that.
Anyway,
perhaps.
yeah, maybe literary tension.
Let's put a pin in that and come back to that in a little bit.
Pin.
So David brings the Ark he sets up a priestly bureaucracy like he should have the first time.
Why do you say bureaucracy?
Because I don't know another way to talk about hundreds and hundreds of people being given specific jobs and hierarchical systems of who reports to who within a system.
So that's happening.
That's happening. So what David's doing is he's not just saying, okay, we need some priests.
Right.
Let me grab the first 10.
He's
saying, no, here's 500 men who have been qualified. Let me give them a hierarchy of who reports to who. You guys are in charge of the music. You guys are in charge of the offerings. You guys are in charge of the singing. You guys are the ones who are going to guard all these in case anybody tries to attack us on the road.
Okay.
And let's go.
Okay.
So he's not just doing a couple of random actions. He's building an organization,
Right.
a Levitical organization that can handle the institutionalization of God's presence in Jerusalem. He's not just doing good things. He's building a government.
Okay.
And he's building a priestly organizational bureaucracy in order to handle what will soon become thousands upon thousands of sacrifices for millions of people to come and worship and ask for God's guidance in Jerusalem.
see.
He can't just have 8 guys to go and bring
That's right.
the ark. He needs to build a system of governance
Right.
and a system of priesthood so that it can handle the sins of an entire nation.
Right.
Right?
And the point there isn't like leadership parable.
No.
Make sure your systems are organized. And it's the point is that David is taking seriously
Yes.
the need of what the priesthood accomplishes.
That's right.
Which is we need a group of singers doing prophecy, and they need a head singer in order to organize it all so that it all happens. We need to take the forgiveness of sin seriously, and so in order to do that, we have to be able to facilitate forgiveness through sacrifices for a whole nation.
For a king of David to center Israel around the priesthood isn't just symbolic gestures or even teaching moments.
Yeah,
It's actually building
a real
an
boots on the ground.
infrastructure
Yeah.
that can handle that.
Totally.
So that's what he's doing. That's why I say bureaucracy.
Yeah, no, it's really helpful. I just didn't know why that word. That's really cool. Okay, so he has his priestly bureaucracy.
Bureaucracy.
I tried in that moment to think of a different word. And yeah, it doesn't.
They're singing.
Yep.
The ark.
As all bureaucracies do.
All good bureaucrats sing. And then David leaves them all. And you know where he goes?
I do not know.
He goes to Gibeon, where the tabernacle is.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And he starts offering sacrifices, thanking God for what he's done
Okay.
in Jerusalem.
That is strange.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
So this is one of the questions I had that when you do you have any questions? I was like, I don't know if they're helpful.
Yes.
This is the question I had is what is the tabernacle without the ark? What is a sacrifice without the place to sprinkle it?
Right.
That was just like, this is weird.
Yeah.
And I'm like, are they even obeying Torah in this moment?
I think so. What happens next after he goes and offers sacrifices is the very next thing he does. He comes back to Jerusalem and he goes to his head prophet, Nathan.
Okay.
He says, I want to build a house for God.
Oh, okay.
In Jerusalem.
So,
with the ark.
Yeah.
So his first instinct after bringing the ark is, let's get the tabernacle here too.
I mean, can't you just picture that inner monologue of like walking to the tabernacle after having this crazy experience with the ark, making sacrifices there, and then walking back and being like, these two things are supposed to be together.
That's right.
And they need to be right next to the center of Jerusalem's power, Israel's power.
Yeah.
Because it's God's throne.
That's right.
Man, that is cool. Okay.
And again, it's proving the main point. He is centralizing the functions of the priesthood.
Yes.
In Jerusalem, or like for Israel. The sacrificial system, the presence of God, the authority of God's all coming together in one spot. He's building the right type of kingdom.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting, though, is when he tells Nathan this, that he wants to build God a house, he kind of says it like as if he feels guilty.
Oh, right. Because isn't he like, I'm living in like a walled palace?
Yeah. But God responds and he tells David, like, I never asked to have a temple of cedar. Like, if I would have wanted that from you, I would have told you.
Right.
You don't need to feel guilty for having a better palace than me because I've never asked you to build a better palace.
The whole world is my palace.
The whole world is my palace.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. But he does honor David's impulse for wanting to centralize the function of the priesthood in Jerusalem, right? He's like, it's good that you wanted to do this thing. And in fact, I'm going to let your son build it for you. You can't because you're a man of war. We talked about this already.
Yep.
But more than that, the big thing that happens in this moment is that God honors David's desire to centralize the priesthood in Israel by saying, you don't have to build me a house. I'm going to build up your house. And he promises David that his dynasty will rule forever, that his house, his lineage will be the one that rules Israel, God's people, for all time. And his son will be the way in which the world is saved functionally. And and it's in that context that he finally says, and your son will be the one to build the house you want to build.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's a house that wants to center everything on God's house is the house that God will let last forever.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
All right.
That's right.
Okay, so it seems like David has been consolidating, right?
Okay.
That's the theme I'm picking up.
That's
here,
right. That's right.
Is he's like, let me consolidate power, let me consolidate the center of authority in Jerusalem. Let me consolidate the scattered tribes. Let me consolidate some peace through our enemies. We're going to have some military victory. Let me consolidate the artifacts of our faith with the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle.
Yep.
And get all that. And then there's going to be this permanent consolidation in the house of God next to the King of God that will reign forever. That's like what he's doing. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that like what we should be thinking? Is it just feels like this sucking in?
That's right.
Of everything into this Davidic temple epicenter of Israel.
The main point the chronicler wants to make is that when a king of David centralizes his Israel around the priesthood, it experiences rest, victory, and prosperity.
Okay, so then if that's true, after this happens and David's, God being like, hey, your heart's good. I'm glad you want to build me a house. You're consolidating everything. You've centralized it around the priests. The next thing I should expect is some peace or something?
He experiences victory after victory after victory over enemies that are threatening Israel's sovereignty.
Okay.
So all these other nations who are threatening to attack Israel, David is victorious over all of them.
Yes. So once the nation is centralized around the priesthood through King of David, peace starts to go out around the land. Okay.
And significantly during some of these battles, it's like God's up to something that shouldn't, like impossible things start happening when David goes to war. God is acting on his own. And soon enough, nations start like bowing to David without ever going to war to him. There's I don't want to fight you anymore. So we're at peace now.
We'll kiss the ring.
We'll kiss the ring. And so that idea of like peace coming is happening through the military victories provided for by God.
Yes. And not just peace in Israel, peace outside of Israel.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Very good.
So we kind of have a whole bunch of victories end up happening.
Yeah.
Big deal. And at the end of this series of victories, David does something that breaks the chronicler's mold.
Oh, the ideal paradigm.
The ideal paradigm.
Of listen to God and you'll win.
That's right.
Okay.
He does something against God's voice, and he takes a census of all of his warriors.
And is the idea that he does that, it's an uncommissioned census, God didn't tell him to do this, is the idea, I can't remember, is it like that he did it out of pride? Like that he wanted to know how big his kingdom was, that he might have wanted to do it for like bad taxation reasons?
Maybe all those things. I think the thing that Chronicles would want us to think more closely about is what would knowing the exact number of your military men allow you to do on your own?
Build the biggest army that you can?
Maybe. Well, you already have the army, so you're counting the army. My thought here is that if I know exactly how many military forces I have, I can start making plans without asking God's advice.
That's right, because I have all the information.
I have all the information I need. I don't need to ask God what's feasible or how many men need to go to war. I can start making calculations on my own.
I see. So the census was a way for David to potentially start weaning himself off of depending on God's guidance.
I think that's probably the way the chronicler would have you think about it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
And God takes it very seriously.
Yeah.
This is a gross injustice to God on David's part.
Yeah.
And God, we're told in his wrath comes to punish David. He gives David the option of experiencing either 3 years of famine, 3 months of devastation from their political enemies, or 3 days of the sword of the Lord, which he describes as pestilence or plagues.
Whoa.
David responds by saying, I would rather throw myself on your sword, God, than the sword of my enemies. So attack us for 3 days.
I see.
Right?
Because everything else was more external.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. He's like, I would rather trust you for 3 days than my enemies for 3 months.
If someone's going to have a sword against me, I'd want it to be the Lord.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Golly, I could stay there forever.
Yeah.
I need to camp out there. Oh, goodness. Okay. We might have to come back to that.
So through that, 70,000 people in Israel die.
Oh my goodness.
because of David's failure.
And that would have looked like a plague.
Yeah, a pestilence.
Yeah.
And then after 70,000 people die, God sends that angel of the Lord with his sword drawn.
We talked about in the last episode.
Yeah,
Yes.
to Jerusalem.
So here he comes with his sword.
Mm-hmm. And as he's on the way to Jerusalem, the Lord saw, we're told, and he relented.
And are we supposed to be getting like Passover vibes here? Because you have a series of plagues finished by the visit of an angel of death. And then there's forgiveness and passing over.
I actually haven't thought about that.
Like that, just like a new Exodus
I
narrative.
have not thought about that. That's really interesting.
One of the echoes of Exodus.
What is interesting is on that idea, if we are seeing Passover parallels here, and the first enemy that Israel kind of comes up against after Solomon's rise comes from Egypt. So we have kind of a reversal of what happened in the Passover, where Egypt is now or I guess it's the same thing, but Egypt is involved in the next story.
I mean that.
So,
if Solomon's the top of the chiasm, and you have this like Exodus event and then this Egyptian slavery event, kind of those do talk to each other. That's cool.
So God tells this angel,
or it's really
Lord,
sad. It's not cool.
Yes.
Sorry, it's cool literarily. It's devastating historically.
So God sends this angel of the Lord over Israel, giant sword in his hand, but tells him to stop.
Yeah.
David sees this giant angel of the Lord over Jerusalem and rides out to him.
Yeah.
Okay. And he meets him on this threshing floor, this farmer's land. Which, I forgot to tell you this point. The last time David failed, when around the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes, right.
That man that died, he died at another threshing floor.
Oh.
So he died in another farmer's land.
Okay.
And so another failure is happening at another farmer's land. Or actually, in this case, the failure is being resolved on another farmer's land.
Right, but David thinks he's probably going there to die. Yeah, so like the blood was on his hands from that guy that he sent to the Ark of the Covenant, and he's going now to another farmer's land to lay down his own life to pay for and sacrifice himself for Israel, and maybe even this other soldier who died because of his order.
That's right. We talked about this in the last episode a little bit more explicitly, but this is where David, seeing the consequences of his own sin, rushes out to meet the agent of God's wrath and says, it's not my men's fault. It's not Jerusalem's fault that we're under your wrath. It's mine. So kill me. If you're going to kill anybody, kill me instead.
Oh my gosh.
And then what's crazy is the angel commands David to build an altar right there.
That is a little crazy.
Right?
Since you're not supposed to... Wait, an altar for sacrifice?
An altar for sacrifice.
I mean, you're not supposed to sacrifice outside the temple, right?
You're not supposed to sacrifice outside the place God names.
Oh, loophole.
Loophole. So God tells him to build an altar right there in this farmer's field.
Yeah.
David goes and buys the field, builds the altar, sacrifices, and then the angel of the Lord sheaths his sword. He responds to the act of self-sacrifice of Israel's leader, gives mercy to the entire nation because of one man's sacrifice. And we're told that this failure establishes the grounds for the new temple. On the place of David's self-sacrifice is where the new God's temple will be built. And God tells him explicitly, you said you want to build a temple, this is where you're going to do it.
It's too much. It's just too much. How do you... Okay, we have to stop.
Okay, yes. This is a big moment.
I can't go on.
Yeah.
The weight is too heavy. I have too much backup of gospel-centeredness. Okay, can we just unpack this for a moment?
Please.
And we've talked about a lot, but let's just stay in this story, because I'm like, there's like 90,000 threads that are being pulled on. But you do... Okay, so you have this idea that the angel of the Lord, the instrument of the Lord's wrath, is coming towards his people. And God's king, from the line of David
Founding
himself,
father of Israel, yes,
goes and substitutes himself at the place that will become the temple.
That's right.
And the Lord, and the offers a sacrifice, and the Lord's wrath is averted.
That's right.
I mean, it's like there's so many little things in there I want to pick up, but that is the story of the gospel.
That is. And can I pull another thread? Add a thread, add a layer, add an onion skin.
Yes. Don't make me cry.
We're told when Solomon finally builds the temple on this place.
On that place, yep.
We're told that he's building it on top of Mount Moriah.
Right.
Which is the same place that another founding father of Israel, Abraham, was going to make a sacrifice, but God stopped him from making a sacrifice by providing another one instead.
Right.
And so now twice on Mount Moriah, God has provided a means for Israel to be saved other than the death of one of Israel's sons.
Yeah. And that will be the place where people come with their sin.
That's right.
To offer sacrifices at the temple and be forgiven.
That's right.
Okay, I'm having a chicken or the egg moment here.
Okay.
Which one came first?
Okay.
The sacrificial system, and do we define what's happening there by the laws in Leviticus and let atonement just exist inside of how it's described in Leviticus, or is now the story reinterpreting what God commanded the sacrificial system to accomplish? Or is it giving us its base definition? Like the founding story of the temple sacrifices is substitution.
I understand.
And yet for Leviticus, the tabernacle, it was a lot about the purity of the land. And I know like atonement theory and arguments fly, but it's like those two aren't afraid to just talk to each other and sync up. So I'm just like, this story is just like atonement theories colliding. Yeah. And I kind of just love it.
I love it.
It's just a super nerdy route here.
I mean, at the very least, God intends for his people to build their lives, their nations around forgiveness and sacrifice.
Drill in there.
Okay.
Because that's the thing that I think can get missed.
Yeah.
In atonement, especially when it comes to the mechanics of it.
Okay.
And the temple, the tabernacle, the sacrifices, the lambs.
What's happening? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, like what's going on here? And it's like this at base is what's going on here. Is God wants to center his people around his forgiving heart.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And the way he accomplishes forgiveness is through self-substitution.
That's right.
And it's like, that's what he does through Jesus.
That's right.
He's like, can I show you, my people, how much I want to forgive you, how much I love you?
Yeah.
I'm going to come and sacrifice myself.
Yeah.
Except I'm not going to let the angel put the sword back in its sheath.
Yeah. I keep thinking about the way that God refuses for fathers or sons to take the blame for something that he was going to do in the future.
That's right.
He doesn't let he makes Abraham sheath his sword.
Yep.
He makes the angel of the Lord sheath his sword against David.
Yeah.
But
Jesus,
because he was waiting to be a sacrifice on his own, to save his people.
Yeah. No, none of them ever had to say, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit."
Right.
Only Jesus had to say that.
Which is interesting to think about the way that's what David does at the beginning of this curse. He says, "I commit myself to your hand, Lord. I would rather suffer at your hand."
He doesn't say that, does he? Does he use those words? Because that would be ridiculous.
Not those exact words, but he does say, he says this. He says, "I am in great distress. Let me fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercy is very great."
I mean,
it's pretty close.
Is Jesus picking up on that on the cross?
I mean,
God, I'm falling into your hands, trusting you for mercy on the other side of this death. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's pretty amazing.
Jesus is proving that he's a true son of David, ruling his people.
Well, and he's proving the heart of God.
Yes.
That whether in life or through death, God's heart is to forgive.
Yeah.
And he'll do that through, even if he has to substitute himself for you.
Yeah. And I keep thinking there's like a whole bunch of personal good news here. But I'm also just thinking about, what does it really mean to build a kingdom, a nation, a country around forgiveness?
Right.
That's its central tenet, is forgiveness and self-sacrifice.
Right.
What does a country built around those things look like?
I know what it doesn't look like.
I know what it doesn't look like, but I know where I get the best picture of that in the church.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
That is an institution. It's not an individual thing.
That's right.
But that is a nation, a kingdom, an alternate kingdom, not of this world, where our founding document talks about the forgiveness of sins.
Yes.
and the necessity of sacrificing for others.
Right. And
The primary example being Jesus.
Right.
And we gather together every week in a building.
Right.
Not a temple, but a building. We are temples, but
or a tent or a
or
field.
tent, and we are field, and we
Yeah.
reorient, we recenter our lives around those two things, and then we go out into the world
as priests.
To do that same thing all over again.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating when you think about the way Jesus taught about how his church should operate, and it's really now that you've used the word bureaucracy, it's one of the most bureaucratic texts in Jesus's teaching, which is where he's talking. I think it's to Peter about how many times he should forgive his brother. And there's rules about excommunication, and there's rules about how many witnesses do you need, and there's all this stuff about how the church should operate when people sin within it.
Yeah.
And he says, how many times should I forgive my brother? And he basically says infinitely.
Yeah.
Forgive him perfection times perfection, 70 times 7. And it's like the church is supposed to be built on endless forgiveness.
Yeah.
For those who would throw themselves upon the mercy of the Lord and commit their spirit into his hands.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think I want to keep using the words institution, bureaucracy, because what happens after this moment, David knows where the temple should be built.
Yeah.
He knows his son will build it. He knows the kingdom should be centered around the priesthood, the place of self-sacrifice, and the place of forgiveness, and the place of listening to God's voice. But he's not allowed to build that place. So what he does instead is he builds a nation. He charters an institution. In the next several chapters are lists of thousands and thousands of court officials, musicians, treasurers, diplomats. He builds a government in the next several chapters for his son to inherit. And the idea here is that David is doing what a good king should do. He should build a government that focuses in on, centers around, builds an institution around the forgiveness of God and the voice of God.
Yeah.
And he's doing the best he can, knowing the information that he has and knowing what God has limited him to do.
I'm struggling
Okay.
seeing the thread of building a kingdom focused around the priesthood in what you just said.
Okay.
In the building of court officials and
Yes.
it made a ton of sense with the Levite bureaucracy, the priest bureaucracy. What's happening in this next another probably trippy up section that people will find boring?
I should reiterate, every bureaucratic moment in the next several chapters is all about the Levites.
Oh, okay.
Everything he does after this point is to prepare for the successful operation of a completed temple.
Okay. So, yeah, he wasn't building the Parks and Recreation Department.
No. He's not. He's organizing Levites by the tens of thousands. He's dividing priests according to 24 different divisions and subdivisions. He's dividing the musicians according to 24 different divisions. He's marking and appointing cabinet members, treasury, accountants. He's building his son an entire bureaucracy and an institution
that's focused around the priests.
That's focused around the priests.
I see.
The last thing he does do, so he does all this. As he should.
And that was like 24 through 27?
To 26, basically.
Okay, 26.
27 is another, it's more bureaucracy, but it's military bureaucracy.
Okay.
He builds a military complex.
Got it.
In order to protect the temple.
Right.
That's what the kingdom is supposed to do. And at some point, some nation's going to attack, and we should stand ready to listen to God's voice and how we should do that. We're not going to be unwise and have no military in case we need it.
Sure.
We're living in a fallen world. I don't know. I'm maybe overinterpreting, but he's doing something good in this moment.
Okay. This is somehow different than the last census.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's really somehow different than the last census. And remember, going back all the way to the genealogy, you had on the outside you had the kings, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, the kingly tribes, and on the inside of them is the rest of the tribes of Israel. And then the inside of that, you have the priests.
Right. And it was the whole nation and political complex surrounding the priests as they surround the temple.
Right. So the king's job is to protect the temple.
Yep.
But the king's job is also to protect the people.
Yep.
And the people's job is also to protect the temple. And so what's interesting, in this military list, is an accounting for all the tribes of Israel. It's an accounting of everybody's combined responsibility to protect the institution of the temple.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I'm like, this is where I start to be like, why does this matter to the how would this matter to the first recipient?
I understand.
Is like, what? Okay, cool. That happened.
Yeah.
Like, why? Like, I got the point of a lot of the other censuses and stuff like that, but for this, like, when a Jew returning from exile and rebuilding the temple, questioning the line of David, questioning the legitimacy of the temple, what is this doing for them?
David does all this, tens and tens of thousands of people. He also collects all the building materials for the temple.
Okay.
So millions of pounds of precious metals.
Right.
Like we're told multiple times, we can't measure how much there is. There's just, he builds all the stones, gathers the gold, gathers the jewels. He's like preparing for his son to do better than him.
So Solomon didn't have to do any of this gathering?
None of it.
Oh my goodness.
His father did it all for him.
Okay.
And if you're on the beginning stages
Yeah.
of rebuilding your country, you're going to be preparing for a generation after you.
Oh yeah.
You are going to be handing off your nation to people less experienced and perhaps less equipped than you
Right.
to do the will of God.
Right.
So for this first generation, what do they need to be like? They need to be like David, who's preparing in advance for the future success of God's priesthood and the future success of God's Davidic king. And so what does that look like? Boots in the ground?
Yeah.
Bureaucracy. It looks boots on the ground like make sure you have generals and ambassadors and diplomats and heads of state and cabinet members. Make sure you have the names of those who are allocated by the Torah to be musicians. Make sure they're the same people.
Yeah.
Make sure that line of descent is correct.
I think I'm following, and it's like, let me take a stab.
Yeah.
Because I'm remembering Ezra Nehemiah, you know, and the king allows them to come back from exile and even equips them to rebuild the temple. But the showing of returning exiles is meek. Not many people go back.
Yeah.
And they get there, they try to scrounge together some Levites, and they get enough to accomplish something.
Yeah.
But the temple's weak. There's no king on the throne. There's no throne for a king to be on.
Yeah.
They get a governor, and a lot of people aren't even returning from exile. And it's like you have this galvanization under David's reign of resources, people, organization. It's this sucking in again that's happening. And I could see this story being a clarion call to those still in exile or those timidly returning or those lackadaisically waiting in Israel about the need to rebuild Israel.
Right.
To rebuild the nation.
Right.
And not just Israel matters.
Yes.
Right? Like
yes.
It matters
yes.
as a nation state in the world because it's where God's king is going to reign. You know, he's going to come from there. He's going to execute justice from there.
Yeah.
And they need to be about its rebuilding.
That's right.
I could see that as like a kick in the pants.
That's exactly what it's supposed to be, because after all this stuff happens, Solomon is given the kingdom. He's crowned king, and we get 9 chapters of description of what his reign looked like.
Okay.
And this is supposed to be the high point of the whole book. If you nation builders are like your first founding father who built a nation, look what's possible when you have a Davidic king who's focused on the priesthood, making sure that God's nation is built around forgiveness and listening to his voice. Here's what it could look like. And then he offers up Solomon as an example.
Wow. Okay. We're going to have to land the plane here.
Okay.
And then I guess we'll have to talk about Solomon next. But one last thing, although there's a ton I think that we could pull on from the life of David. I mean, I'm thinking like obviously Jesus says that he never did anything without listening to the voice of his father, and he perfectly led a kingdom. You know, he is the king of David who says, the kingdom of God is at hand. It's here. Why? Because I'm here. Yeah. You know, and so it's, man, there's so much to pull on there. He galvanizes 12 disciples, gathers them around himself.
That's right.
And takes them to Jerusalem.
Yeah, and he goes on a healing conquest.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Instead of defeating armies, he defeats sickness and leprosy and demons, and they flee from the 12 disciples. Yeah.
It's amazing how Jesus' life maps on to David's ascension in Chronicles.
That's right.
Yeah, he's anointed, right, by John the Baptist, right? And then he Then he goes out on his campaign to start healing people. He gathers
right.
12 disciples,
Yeah.
takes them to Jerusalem. He even goes and stands in the temple itself and shows that he's the new place where forgiveness of sins will come from.
Yeah.
And then he commits himself to God's hands on the cross.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
You're getting the whole
raises,
story.
raises a whole kingdom of priests to rule. And then this is the thing that we get to now is we are Solomon and Jesus is David. Jesus earned an entire kingdom for us, built it, paid for it,
Yep.
brought it to us, organized it,
Yep.
and then said, here you go, my son.
Right.
Rule and reign
Yes.
on my behalf.
Yes. And I think, and this is me being maybe weirder than I should be, but the good news of bureaucracy
Okay. Yeah.
is the good news of a church. Because the church doesn't exist without leadership,
Right.
elders, teachers,
Yeah.
prophets, apostles. Like
Right.
a church is built up of a whole bunch of moving parts that need organization. And we're also told that the global church also has a structure. It's called the body of Christ.
Right.
So limbs, fingers,
All under
legs,
the head of Christ.
all under the head of Christ. Like God has saved us in Jesus to build a new organism,
Yeah.
a new kingdom, a new bureaucracy that does what? That centers itself around the forgiveness of God, his own self-sacrifice for the good and peace of the nations.
Yeah.
And that's what we do in church, not just as individuals, which is sure true enough, but like we are saved to do this as an entity, like a moving force in the world, a
Right.
kingdom
Yeah.
that's not of this world, an alternate kingdom.
Yes.
Um,
No, I think it's so good to say it another way, because I think you're absolutely right. I think to say it another way is people should look at the organization of the church, right? And it
Yes.
doesn't matter what we're talking about here. Talk
Right.
about global, talk about it local, talk
Yes.
about it Eastern Orthodox, Protestant, evangelical, Roman Catholic. Like you should, whoever it is, any Jesus followers that are collected together, right?
yes,
The world should look at that and go, that's a different kingdom.
that's right.
It's organized different. It's operating different. It's built around something different.
That's right.
What is it? They're listening to the voice of God, so they're acting differently in the world, and that looks that looks strange. Just bringing peace to our neighborhood,
That's right.
and their modus operandi is forgiveness,
Yeah.
and that's we hold on to loans and debts, and you have a criminal record, and we operate on unforgiveness.
Yeah.
Government
yeah.
operates on unforgiveness, like
Yeah.
taxes and like everything
Right.
is debt and owe.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
And what is going on? They don't owe the church money, but they give freely, right? Like
Right.
they're not being paid by the church, but they work there. Like these volunteers, what are they doing? What is this
They're
place?
all priests sacrificing themselves for the sake
Right,
of
they're
each
living
other.
sacrifices, and it's this weird counter kingdom that we inherited from the final king of David.
Yeah, and in the same hope that like Solomon's kingdom might last forever, David's son would last forever. Like that kingdom would last forever, and that
Yep.
was the hope that God promised David. The church will last forever.
Yes, the gates of hell will not prevail against it.
There's the only one unstoppable institution in the world,
Yep.
and it's the church.
That's right.
Um,
That's good.
so
Okay, well, that was David.
that was David.
Yeah, and that took us through the end of First Chronicles.
That's right.
Yeah.
So next time we'll start with the idealized reign of King Solomon, and then maybe some examples from the rest of the Book of Chronicles.
Amazing. Can't wait. Thank you guys for joining us in this walkthrough of Chronicles. It's been awesome. We can't wait to see you next time. So we'll see you there.
Thank you for listening to the Spoken Gospel Podcast. Spoken Gospel creates short films, devotionals, and podcasts like this one. Everything we make is free because of generous supporters like you. To see our resources, visit spokengospel.com or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening. See you next time.